Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's just dive straight into this one, because today we are looking at a real-world case study that is absolutely fascinating and, honestly, pretty shocking. We're going to unpack the anatomy of a truly toxic corporate culture, a secret multi-million-dollar fraud, and most importantly, how corporate fraud inevitably creates real innocent victims. We're looking at the story of Daniel Carter. His life got completely turned upside down, which kicked off a dramatic chain of events leading to one of the most incredible corporate turnarounds you'll probably ever hear about. We're going to trace exactly how bad leadership operates in the shadows and see the actual human cost of calculated corporate fraud. So to really grasp the scale of what happened here, we got to start at the emotional baseline. 6 devastating words that completely erased 8 years of absolute loyalty. I'm afraid your position has been eliminated. Just picture this. You're sitting in a dead silent conference room with 22 of your coworkers. Your regional director, Richard Lawson, is sitting there wearing an expensive watch and this smug little smile, and he just slides a white envelope across the table. Daniel Carter was a top-performing sales leader, the guy who regularly covered shifts, fixed mistakes for his team, and he was just suddenly being thrown out. And honestly, the absolute worst part? His colleagues, specifically a manager named Kevin and another named Melissa, were literally trying to hide their laughter. And the timing? Oh man, the timing made this so much worse. This wasn't just a sudden firing. It was a devastating personal blow because it happened exactly 7 days before Daniel's wedding. So as Daniel is going through the ultimate corporate humiliation of being escorted out of the building by security after 8 years of stellar service, his personal life is completely collapsing. His venue payment had literally just bounced. He and his fiancée, Emma, actually had to politely call and cancel their wedding venue because they just couldn't pay for it anymore. The emotional toll of these corporate decisions, it's rarely captured on a balance sheet, but the human cost here, it was absolute. But Daniel's story is a total masterclass in how different organizational cultures can be. You really have to contrast his old company, Westbridge Solutions, which basically operated purely on fear, with his new home, Horizon Dynamics. At Westbridge, managers stole credit, they mocked their employees, and they drove turnover through the roof. But after weeks of getting rejected, Daniel finally lands an interview with Thomas Brooks, the leader at Horizon Dynamics. And Horizon is the exact opposite. It's built on trust. Managers actually thank their employees. They invest in leadership development instead of just squeezing people for profits. During the interview, when asked what he'd do first if hired, Daniel didn't say he'd cut costs. He said he would build a team that actually trusted each other. Horizon hired him right on the spot as a director, and they doubled his previous salary. It's crazy how quickly fate can turn around, right? In October, Daniel is fired and marched out like a criminal. But fast forward to January, he's absolutely crushing it as a director at Horizon, building a team that is just shattering their sales targets. Then, just 3 months later in April, the unthinkable happens. Horizon Dynamics announces a massive multi-million-dollar acquisition of Westbridge Solutions. Yeah, his old company. So Daniel isn't just an employee anymore. Thomas Brooks actually taps him to be the senior vice president in charge of overseeing the entire restructuring of Westbridge. In just 6 months, Daniel goes from being the discarded scapegoat to the executive holding the personnel files of the exact same people who laughed at him. Now, the crucial point here is how Daniel handles this newfound power. He doesn't go on some petty revenge tour. Instead, he initiates a completely objective review. He sits down with the personnel files, and he just looks for the facts. And wow, the data was damning. Under the leadership of Kevin, Richard, and Melissa, Westbridge was structurally failing. Kevin's department alone lost 18 employees in just 2 years and saw a 26% drop in customer satisfaction. He was rubber stamping false overtime reports. Melissa was just straight up ignoring ethics complaints from the junior staff. This toxic culture wasn't just mean, it was literally destroying the company's bottom line. Which brings us to the formal interviews. When Daniel finally sits down across from his former boss, Richard actually tries to act like this proud mentor figure. It's wild. But Daniel, he just calmly places an anonymous employee survey right on the table, and it reads, "Management rewards loyalty instead of talent. Leadership creates fear, not respect." Richard, of course, tries to claim his team never told him this. But as Daniel quickly points out, they did. Richard just wasn't listening. It just goes to show that power built entirely on intimidation eventually crumbles under its own weight when it's forced to face objective reality. But then, the investigation takes a massive turn. Daniel gets a private interview request from Linda Morales, the former HR manager back at Westbridge. Now, Linda was one of the very few people there who actually treated people with respect. She walks into Daniel's new office carrying this thick envelope, and she just looks like she's been carrying this massive weight for 6 months. She confesses that she knew the truth about Daniel's firing all along, but she kept quiet because her husband was going through cancer treatment at the time. If she blew the whistle, she would have lost her family's health insurance. So she hands Daniel this envelope, and inside is the absolute truth of what really went down that day in October. And that truth was called Project Phoenix. It was a completely secret corporate initiative designed to intentionally scapegoat an innocent employee. Here is what actually happened behind the scenes. Richard had approved this highly risky contract that completely violated company policy and ended up costing Westbridge millions. Knowing the board was going to be furious, Richard, Kevin, and Melissa actually conspired to blame the entire sales department. And they specifically targeted Daniel because, well, he was conveniently on vacation when the contract was signed. They completely manufactured a fake termination, calling it a position elimination, just to save their own necks. Daniel didn't fail at his job. He was sacrificed. But the crazy thing is, Linda's envelope had way more than just the Project Phoenix emails. She also handed over manipulated spreadsheets that blew this entire case wide open. When Daniel and Thomas Brooks quietly brought in the internal audit team, they uncovered something absolutely staggering. $4 million. Let that sink in. This wasn't just some sloppy management or a desperate cover-up of one bad contract. This was active, calculated theft that had been slowly bleeding the company dry for years, and nobody had noticed. The auditors figured out exactly how this corporate fraud was operating in the shadows. Nearly $4 million had been diverted through very specific channels over a 3-year period. We're talking fraudulent executive bonuses, totally fake consulting contracts that were just designed to siphon money straight out of the company, altered invoices, unauthorized expense reimbursements, the whole 9 yards. And the names attached to every single one of these manipulated entries: Richard Lawson, Kevin Harris, and Melissa Grant. They weren't just toxic leaders creating a miserable workplace. They were actively defrauding their own employer, all while firing innocent people to cover their tracks. So all of this leads to the ultimate climax in the boardroom. Thomas Brooks, Daniel, the board of directors, and internal audit call Richard, Kevin, and Melissa into the exact same room where Daniel was fired just 6 months prior. The auditors just throw the evidence right up on the projector: 27 manipulated documents, complete with bank records and signatures. And it took exactly 4 minutes for their corrupt little alliance to completely crumble. The second the pressure hit, Kevin immediately threw Richard under the bus, claiming he just signed whatever Richard told him to sign. There is zero loyalty among thieves, guys, especially in a toxic corporate culture like this one. While these executives are literally turning on each other, Daniel stands up. He doesn't yell. He doesn't gloat about it. He just looks directly at Richard and asks the one single question that has been haunting him since his life was upended. When you fired me, did you know I had nothing to do with Project Phoenix? He forces Richard to look at the actual human being whose life he derailed, the innocent victim that he created just to balance a spreadsheet and hide a mistake. The room goes completely silent, and Richard, totally stripped of all his power and that smug attitude, finally admits the truth in front of the entire board of directors. Yes, he knew Daniel was completely innocent. Now, Richard tries to justify it by saying he was just trying to protect the company, but Thomas Brooks shuts that down instantly, pointing out that Richard was only trying to protect himself. That single word, yes, was the nail in the coffin. It cemented Richard's total downfall. The consequences were swift, and they were absolute. The board chairwoman immediately initiates federal investigations into the fraud. Richard, Kevin, and Melissa are fired on the spot. And then, in a moment of just absolute poetic justice, security officers quietly walk into the room to escort them out of the building. Daniel just watches this happen, realizing that this time security isn't a punishment for an innocent scapegoat. It's the direct, undeniable consequence of their own unethical choices. But you know what I love most about this case study? It's how things actually ended up for Daniel. He didn't just get his career back, he got his life back, and on way better terms. He and Emma didn't end up having some massive, stressed-out luxury wedding. Instead, they got married in a modest, beautiful botanical garden right by a quiet lake, and they were surrounded only by people who genuinely supported them. Losing his job felt like the absolute end of the world at the time, but in reality, it rescued him. It rescued him from a toxic environment where loyalty meant absolutely nothing. And there's actually a pretty surprising postscript to all this. About a year later, Daniel receives an anonymous letter. It's from Richard. Richard writes that watching everything unfold forced him to actually take responsibility for his own choices. He wrote, "I had become the kind of leader I once promised never to be." He wasn't asking for forgiveness, he just admitted that Daniel was right. It's such a powerful reminder that true success isn't about proving your enemies wrong. It's about building a life so fulfilling that you can just leave the toxicity completely behind you. Which leaves us with a final, really vital question to ask ourselves as we wrap up today's explainer. Take a look at your own corporate environment. Is your workplace building genuine trust, investing in its people, and actually solving problems together? Or is it operating on fear, hiding mistakes, and just searching for its next scapegoat? Because as we've clearly seen today, power that's built on intimidation, it doesn't last, and the truth always, always has a way of coming to light. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this fascinating story, and I'll see you in the next explainer.